Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast. Ozcast. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Reading. It's like being completely present and completely absent at the same time.
Hi, welcome to Sundoku. I'm Sarah Martin.
And I'm Michaela Andreev. This is the podcast where we all know the only thing better than a good book is the next good book.
And talking about the next good book, what have you been reading, Michaela?
Well, I've been reading a couple of books that didn't quite work out, to be honest. And I don't know where you stand on the putting your book aside thing.
I find it hard, but I have done it once in a while.
So you would
rare.
Generally persevere, even if you're not loving it?
Yeah.
Oh.
I'm a glutton for punishment, I think.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure publishers and authors of the world love to hear that, but I'm not quite so nice. So I read this author a number of years ago, wrote a really funny book, loved it, heard a new one was coming out and thought, great, I'm in. And I just felt it fell flat. I gave it about 3 or 4 chapters and then I thought, no. But anyway, luckily my book club was reading another one called Before You Knew My Name. It's by Jacqueline Bublitz. It's about 2 women who arrive in New York. One of them is murdered and the other one finds her body. And then it's the story of finding out, who this woman is. I really enjoyed it. I won't say it's the best book I've ever read, but I really did enjoy it. And my book club loved it. So if you're looking for a book that is going to be a real crowd pleaser, I'd recommend it. It was good.
Okay, so it's one that sort of sits in that middle ground where you're going to tick the box for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think so. Go for it. And what about you? What have you been reading?
I have had a few lately that have fallen flat with me, but I'm not going to talk about them. I'm going to talk about this book I'm currently reading, which is Ghost Lover, and it's by Lisa Taddeo. So you might recognise that name. She wrote this other book called 3 Women, which was more like a documentary non-fiction. This is her first fiction book, but it still really speaks on the interior life of women. So it's very sort of unfiltered. It sort of gets into nitty gritty and perspectives from multiple different women's lives that she talks about. I'm not sure whether I love it or hate it at the moment. I'm mid read, and it's one of those things where I'm just kind of finding the right pace with it. So,
but it's making you think.
It is making me think, and I think that's part of why I persevere as well with books, is just because I think sitting within it for a while allows you to find the pace that the author means for you to be at. So that's my justification.
works for me. So what are we going to talk about today?
Today we're going to hear about a book from the genre called speculative fiction. And if you're wondering what that is, it's defined as writing that explores features of our reality through new and imagined worlds.
So that's distinct from science fiction.
Well, there's some debate about how speculative fiction differs from science fiction, but the best way I can think of explaining it is if you think of writers like Margaret Atwood and David Mitchell, who imagine futures and play with time, you can see the difference from a classic science fiction with silver spaceships compared to the imagined world of Gilead.
Okay, yeah, I get that. That makes sense. Well, Cole Haddon, I believe, is Annie's guest. I've heard of him before as a TV producer for a very popular Dracula series, something that my early 20-year-old children like to watch, and he's just released his first novel.
That's right. It's called Psalms for the End of the World, and it's a sprawling jigsaw of a story. It connects so many different characters through time and space, like an identity-swapping rock star, Nazi hunters in pursuit of a terrible secret, an astronaut struggling with a turbulent interplanetary future, and the FBI even features.
I did see a review of it that said it's a book that crosses centuries, continents and dimensions, which is a lot, really.
Yeah, it sounds wild. And yet, as Cole Haddon told Annie Haswell, it is at heart a love story. Annie's interview begins with Cole Haddon reading a passage from a key early scene.
Gracie doesn't move at all. She's been waiting for him to ask her out for at least a month, probably longer, and Jones knows it, or he should have. He should have spent every second he had with her, even if none of this is real. Shakespeare thought we're nothing more than actors, and maybe that should have been enough. Why couldn't it have been enough for Jones? Maybe because actors know they're playing parts written for them. I I won't be in for a while, he says finally. I've got to go away for work. To that Indian reservation again, she asks. No, you should forget I ever mentioned that. I'll see you again, hopefully. The hopefully immediately worries her. What am I going to do without your nightly visits? Jones slips his fedora on, smiles at Gracie one last time, and walks out without looking back again because he knows he would change his mind if he did. He would take the stage with her and play the part and dance the part and sing the part and love her until the curtains dropped and the show closed for good. And so it takes everything in Jones not to go back to Gracie, to tell her the truth about the trick that's been played on her, what she really is and what he really is, in hope she can forgive him, because this is all his fault.
So, Cole Haddon, that sounds like a love story, but there's a few little intriguing moments in there. It doesn't begin to explain this sprawling epic that you have written, which involves time travel, dimension travel, quantum physics, and all sorts of other things. Is it possible for a reader to sum up what this story is about? Psalms for the End of the World?
Psalms for the End of the World, it begins in 1962 with Grace Polanski. She's a physics student by day and a diner waitress by night. She's secretly in love with Robert Jones, one of her regulars. He comes in every night to eat pie, and their unrequited love affair is interrupted when he leaves on a long work trip he won't talk about. He inexplicably returns the next night, but doesn't remember who she is now. And then the FBI shows up with their guns waving, accusing Jones of blowing up Pasadena City Hall. He has no memory of this. Gracie ends up beside him on this Hitchcockian wrong man escape on the run through America's Southwest, and soon, as you now know, much further. Their quest to try to work out this mystery, is Jones the terrorist, or did someone else with his face do it, begins to intersect with other stories taking place elsewhere across time, including a painter in post-revolutionary France whose paintings drive people mad, a pair of Nazi hunters, an identity-shifting rock star whose music may be key to understanding the universe, two struggling screenwriters in Hollywood, even a wannabe terrorist who's taking instructions from a talking rabbit, several more as well. And as their stories collide, they begin to reveal how the characters and their realities are connected, as I like to say, by love, grief, and quantum physics.
And it must have been enjoyable, I would think, to play with time travel, to imagine other times. And your novel goes from ancient Rome right through to the future and space travel. What was it like to do that, and how much research did you have to do?
Oh, there was considerable research. I spent about 20 years putting together the notes for it. I think these were a lot of ideas collected for other stories, but ultimately they began to coalesce. And about 4 years ago, they came together. The shape of the story presented itself, how to wrangle all of these different worlds together, and it was a lot of fun to be able to pull them together. They're stories that don't immediately make sense next to each other, and so the challenge of that, the puzzle, to be able to weave a puzzle through the course of a book, I think that was half of the fun for me, just to be able to see something so sprawling and then try to make it make sense for the average reader.
What about the constancy of disasters throughout this? Because as you dip in and out of time, there's particularly horrendous things happening, from bombings to a blowing up of a warehouse in ancient Rome, that sort of thing. Why does that tie your story together? Why is that important when you're looking at the history of the world, which I guess you are?
I think for me, violence is such a part of existence, and hope beauty, love, these things exist in such stark contrast to it. And so it was very important to me to play with those shades of reality. And I think also the story of the book of Psalms is very much derived from an emotional state that I was in when I began to work on it, which was January 2017. I had my 9-day-old baby strapped to me. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, but my mother had just died. In about a month, I would find out that my father needed a double lung transplant to live. And so I was surrounded by death as well as life. That created a lot of fear. But then outside the window was the world itself burning down. Brexit had happened in London, in the UK, but I had fled America at the end of 2016 when the election happened. We were those people. My wife and I just decided we were done with living with fear in the American way. And so there was just a sense that the world was falling apart, and I wanted to capture some of that anxiety, violence, horror, the things that happen throughout history, the things that are still happening around us seemed to be such a part of that it was disingenuous to ignore that side of the story.
That's really interesting. I can understand how it seems like there's no hope when you look back at the violence of the world, but at the same time in your book you're looking for hope and love, and the love story between Jones and Gracie, I guess, is the anchor that holds all that together.
Absolutely. I think love permeates most of the stories in the book, even in the middle of darkness. All of the characters are striving for hope. They're reaching for it, and they're trying to hold on to whatever love they have in their lives, which I think it's the story of any of us. Really, the world outside increasingly feels confusing and terrifying, and the only thing that anchors any of us is love, as sentimental as that might sound.
Books like yours are particularly popular these days. There's this kind of fear that the world is accelerating some terrible doom in many people's minds, and I know that with one of your characters that's actually spoken about, this feeling of acceleration and of moving away from reality. Was that something that was, I guess, accelerated by the pandemic?
I think this is something that everyone is experiencing to some degree or another, and the pandemic has accelerated it for many of us. I don't think that this sense is unique to our time period. If you go back through historical documents, you'll find people in 500 AD complaining about how the world has gone to hell, and you have to lock your door now, and you'll find this throughout history, really. So we're experiencing something that was common in 1950 as people worried about nuclear destruction, and is still here. However, I think it's more magnified where we are at this point in time. And so I think I wanted to capture that anxiety. It wasn't so much to suggest that we are in a unique place, but it is a psychological place that I think is becoming more problematic for many of us to probably because of social media. You can't hide. It's not just the evening news that hints at the distress beyond your bubble. And so being able to capture that feeling, what I was experiencing, what I trusted other people were experiencing, it was really was a big driver of the Memoria character in particular that you're describing, but the structure of the book as well, this sense that doom is barreling toward us, and how do we break that pattern in some way? How do we hold on to hope in the middle of it?
You've been likened to Margaret Atwood, David Mitchell, Neil Gaiman, and Emily St. John Mandel, all of my favourite authors, actually. How do you feel about that? Have they been influences on you, or do you admire their work?
I do, and Publishers come up with those comparisons. I would not make them myself because that seems humbling that anybody even thinks to market me in the same realm as them. I'm a huge admirer of all of them, and David Mitchell and Neil Gaiman, I think, played a particular part in this book. The Sandman graphic novel series is one that defies narrative norms to such a degree that I think that it provided me some sense of freedom as I worked on this book to at least ask if I could get away with things, because Gaiman never seemed to care if he could or he couldn't. He just went for it. And Mitchell as well. Cloud Atlas itself is such a remarkable book, as are his others. But then the film is an entirely different experience, which I'm always fascinated by. The one is a simulacra of the other, but also stands alone as a unique creation. And that question about what is real, what is created, what doesn't even matter, the distinction between the two, it's another thread that runs through Psalms as well. So certainly Mitchell and Gaiman and the others are brilliant writers that I can speak about at length as well. But that's more of a hum of influence on me.
The laying of clues through the centuries, through the years, through the places that come into your novel must be a very complicated thing to do as well. And I'm interested in how you go about writing. Do you use a spreadsheet or something to sort of connect everybody up?
I will admit I did not. That is in my head, and probably is why I couldn't concentrate as much on being present in my home life as I should have been for about 18 months. My friend Harley Payton, who's a screenwriter, he wrote about half of the Twin Peaks series, the original series. And he said something to me once at the beginning of this process, really, that David Lynch was the most intuitive filmmaker he'd ever worked with, that Lynch never stopped to ask what he was doing or why. And so when I approached this book, I had a general sense of where it was going. I had a general sense of who about half of the characters were and how they would weave together. But along the way, I let them make their own connections in ways that quite often surprise me, which is also why I was able to finish the book in 6 months and then spend 18 months rewriting it over and over, even after I was working with other people on it, because those connections tightened over time. I had to find out which ones other people saw. Quite often I was too subtle with ones, and so you'd work out which ones you had to hit harder on the head, other ones that you had to pull back on. But it was just, I've been thinking about it for so long. The characters, they found their way to one another very much by themselves.
Is that a magical process, do you feel?
It's an exhausting process and magical because in so many ways it was discovery every day. I know authors talk about that, but it was an extraordinary amount of discovery about who these characters were, quite often who they were in the past, how they connected to events taking place centuries before, sometimes that they were unrelated to. And so every day I discovered something about my own world that excited me and compelled me to come back. I couldn't stop because of that. It was contagious, but the exhausting part is to hold that all together. It's mentally draining, and eventually that even takes a physical toll, which was unique. I look forward to one day writing a novel that just goes A to B to C, and that sounds like a fantasy to me at this point.
It doesn't sound very likely that you will, actually, I have to say. I can't see you being entertained enough by that.
Oh, my wife jokes that every time I suggest an idea for another story, then I'm going to find a way to mess it up. I'm going to take what was simple
And make it
and
difficult.
turn it into something. Yes, which is fine. It's how I think.
Anyway, fabulous creation. And I wonder, as a person who works in film, do you think it would translate well to the screen?
We are discussing it for television at the moment. I do not think this story makes any sense as a film, but as a television series, after 2 years, I'm now convinced I can do it. When I wrote it, I thought, oh, this is unadaptable. And my agents would talk about getting the rights optioned, and I would laugh and think, oh, that's wonderful. That's not going to go anywhere. But it eventually came to me. And I think the approach for a book like this has now been validated by Station 11's adaptation, which I think exists in the same realm as this of sprawling stories that audiences can still follow, and it's involving the audience in a way that linear stories don't always do.
In your book, like, you cover so many places and times and characters, it could become a very confusing read for people. What do you put in there to hold them there? Like, is there a character in particular, do you think, that holds the audience, gets them to hold on and keep going?
For me, it was the central characters of the story as I see them, which are Jones and Gracie and their love story, which is a thread that runs through all 3 sub-books of this book. And I'd hoped that as readers return to them, they would see how the story was progressing and moving forward, and trust that while they might not identify all of the connections yet, that sometimes they might be confused, that I knew where it was going, and if they were patient with me a little bit, that something interesting would happen as a result. So it was really Jones and Gracie, start to finish.
That was author Cole Haddon, and he was talking to Annie Haswell about his debut novel, Psalms for the End of the World. So Sarah, what's your definition of a classic?
I think it's probably the kind of book that my mum read, and then I could pick it up and read and find something in it, and then I hope that maybe my children would, something that's got a bit of resonance.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's very similar to mine, which was, would I read this book a second or a third time? And so there you can fit a lot of books into that genre if you give it a really nice wide definition like that. Earlier this week, I was actually talking to Dani Vee. She's a very interesting woman. She's a podcaster, actually, and if you can believe it, she's made 500 episodes of her podcast, Words and Nerds, in just 5 years. It's incredible. She's also the author of a new children's picture book, and she's in charge of acquisitions at edgy kids publisher Larrikin House. I wanted to ask her how she defines a classic, but first I asked her, how does she fit that massive job description into the life of just one person?
That's a funny question. I don't like to think about it too much because it does actually stress me out. But I also have a very busy mind that doesn't rest, and I also don't need much sleep. So I managed to fit it in. Somehow I'm also a mother of 2, reasonably smallish children.
Yeah.
So I guess it's not hard to do things that you love and that you're passionate about, right? I've always loved literature. I'm an English teacher. I was an English teacher for 17 years, and I think books are really important for so many reasons. They've given me comfort. They've helped me with my anxiety over the years. And people ask me all the time, how do you do it all? And A, I don't like to think about it. But B, if you love it and you have this driving passion for it, even when you are busy, it's worse not to do it,
Yeah.
So I think it's easy when you love it.
Yeah. Do you actually have any time to do reading for yourself?
So, part of the podcast in interviewing people, I need to be reading the books that
It does help, I find.
interviewing. Yeah, it does help. But, I've always been a very fast reader.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, and I've gotten to the stage where I just choose books that I love to do. And so therefore, again, it's not a chore. it's something I enjoy. And, for me, reading, I read some research that reading, like 8 minutes of reading, is kind of like meditation.
Yeah.
And so it is really that downtime, even though it's for the podcast. So I've tried to combine the two. If I didn't have the podcast and all this other stuff going on, I'd be reading anyway, so.
Yeah. In Sundoko, we each episode we look at a classic book or a classic book or two. Is there a book that you would categorise as a true classic in your life, something that you might return to, every few years or so?
Yeah, this was a book that, I sort of taught as a teacher and discovered. And it's Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just one of these books that I do always go back to because, I think you always find something new in it. And I think it's still relevant. And that's sort of how I sort of define a classic book, in that it is still relevant even, 100 years or 200 years later, and you can still find something in it. And with this, it kind of examines the darker side of humanity. It examines how far you'd go to try and reclaim your youth or to, be loved, etc. And we look at social media today, and that's kind of exactly what Oscar Wilde's talking about, being obsessed with appearance. And if you look at Insta threads, and I'm guilty myself, using filters and how many likes you get, and that feels really good. I'm not denying that feels really good, but I think Wilde was sort of examining how far would you go then, to have all of that, and what happens to you morally.
Yeah, and it strikes me as it's a classic for all ages as well. It's a book that can be read to people who are quite young, or read by quite young people, and they will understand the lessons of it as well. Yeah.
And when we're talking young, we're talking high school. I did teach this in my advanced year 11 class. I wouldn't be pulling it out for your 5-year-old.
Stick to the Happy Prince maybe for that one.
But yeah, high school kids really got it as well. They could relate it to their own lives. And it's an interesting question because I don't think we explore the darker side of ourselves. And it's really easy to judge, when we see the news or read a book and say, oh, I wouldn't do that. But I think we've all got our breaking point that if your children are in danger or if you have no choice, you don't actually know what you would do. So I find exploring those things really interesting.
And not all of your podcast episodes are about children's books, but many of them are. Is there a children's classic that comes to mind?
Yeah, when I was a kid, it was all about Judy Blume.
Mm-hmm, yes.
And Charlotte's Web. And these are things that I keep coming back to and trying to get my own kids to enjoy. I've managed to get them to enjoy Babysitter's Club. But
yes,
they haven't been interested that much in Charlotte's Web, which has been a real disappointment for me.
We interviewed someone not so long ago who was talking about reading Charlotte's Web to their children, and they said the children were pretty calm about it all, but he was in bits as he was reading it.
But that's the thing with kids' books, and that's why I think kids' books are so important. I think they're more than books. I think they're time capsules, and I think they're memories, because I think all of us can remember the first time we read a book when we were a kid that we loved. We remember how we were feeling. There's a lot of uncertainty when you're a kid growing up, trying to figure out who you are, and your friends change on a daily basis. And, my parents divorced when I was 13. And so there's lots of things going on. And so I always think kids' books are so much more than a book. They take you back to a time.
And you've written a children's picture book called My Extraordinary Mum. Can you tell me a bit about that and why you wrote that book?
Yeah, this is really about engaging a child and a mother together as they sort of go on all these amazing adventures. And the child is looking up to her mother as she just does all these incredible things. So she's going on road trips without a map, and she's jumping in water holes when they've forgotten their swimmers, and all this kind of fun things. And a part of it I wrote because I thought it was funny, and I didn't see a lot of that out there. But the other two reasons I wrote it was because when I was talking to kids, they were like, you didn't do all these cool things, Mum. When I talked to them about I went to Europe on my own, and I backpacked around New Zealand for 6 weeks, and I went bungee jumping. They were like, who are you? Because you're just Mum who tells us to go to bed and brush our teeth. And I thought, how extraordinary is it that you can live in the same house and often the same bed for a decade with these little people, and they don't actually know the whole person. You know me as only since when you existed. I find that really interesting.
Yeah.
And
didn't we just come into existence when they did?
Yes, it feels like
with the sole desire to keep them going.
That's right. And as well as that, I just looked around at a lot of mainstream TV that my kids are watching, and mums are still, believe it or not, in 2022 in really traditional roles. They're reining the dads in because they're having too much fun. They're the bringers of Band-Aids and floaties and sunscreen. And when haven't been committed to have fun or be ourselves, because it's all about being a mother. And I thought they're all really important things. I love being a mother. I love my children, and I love having that nurturing role, but we're more than that.
Yeah, well, so much has changed, hasn't it? There's technology, feminism, there's truth-telling with First Nations history, there's been the pandemic. Do you think children's books overall are keeping up?
I think yes. I'm not sure if adults are keeping up. But children's books are. Obviously, when you're an educator, and I've been an educator as well, you have to be very careful what you bring into the classroom. But I also think it's okay to push boundaries in books, because books are safe places. You can read them in the safety of your own lounge room. You can put them down at any time. And this is where I think you can push boundaries. And Larrikin House published, a very successful book, My Shadow is Pink, about a boy who wanted to wear a dress and what that looks like for kids, because there are still very standard ways a boy and a girl should act in some ways in our society. So what happens if this child wants to wear a dress and wants to dress up as Elsa? Nothing should happen. You should be able to do whatever you want because you're a kid.
Yeah.
But the follow-up to that book, My Shadow is Purple, I saw in America, the Republican Party are trying to have it banned in school libraries. And so in one way you think that really makes you angry because, we want to try and be inclusive. But on the other hand, it makes me really happy to think, what, if people are trying to ban one of our books, then we're doing something right.
Absolutely.
We're pushing boundaries. We're not being conservative, and it's your choice whether you pick up a book, you know. And as a parent, you can be discerning. But I think, this is what's happening in our world, and we owe it to our kids, and we need to respect our kids enough to show them a reflection of the world in a way in which they can understand. So, I think kids' books are really good at dealing with climate change and inclusivity and individuality and gender. I think sometimes some adults are frightened of them, and I'm not sure why exactly.
Can you tell me about the mission of Larrikin House? Is this part of their mission to break down barriers?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, an agent said to us the other day that we're the only publisher who really told people exactly what they wanted in a manuscript. And I think that's really cool because publishing is such, a difficult industry, and often you don't know what people want. And, some publishing companies aren't as focused, I guess, on brand as we are. We're a small publishing company. So in order to differentiate ourselves, we're like, we want these specific manuscripts. So, we want things that are edgy. We want things that push boundaries, that go against stereotypes. I still see a lot of stories about, mums in the kitchen and mums taking on those really traditional roles. And I'm not saying that that doesn't happen. It happens in my house occasionally, but we've seen that. What else can we see?
Yeah, it's a part of the truth.
Exactly. So, we like fun and quirk. And if there are messages in our books, and there is a message in My Extraordinary Mum, there are messages in My Shadow is Pink and Purple, but if they are, it's kind of got to be behind the joy and the quirk and the humour, because we publish books for kids to have fun, to bring joy to their lives.
So, Dani Vee, have you got any advice for aspiring writers?
So I think in terms of, because I work in acquisitions, which means I read the slush pile and I cull for our publisher, James. So I'll say, here are, a bunch of manuscripts that I thought you'd like. And so I've always got his voice in my head. What's the buy-in for the kid? That's really important for him. Why is a kid not going to pick this book up once, but over and over again? Those dog-eared books, the ones we see that kids love,
Yeah.
Where's the quirk and humour? Character is so important. Where's the hook? All those kind of things that are really important to Larrikin House. And, I think respecting the craft is really important. If we see that you've really worked hard on the prose or the rhythm and you've really thought about what you've written, we feel like that's, really respecting the craft. But you can see when people have kind of just put something together and rushed it through the slush pile. And I just kind of want to say there's no rush. If you're going to submit a manuscript to the portal, get people to have a look at it, think about it, sleep on it, agonise over the words, because we can really tell. From a podcasting perspective, I've always looked at the technical stuff of writing, and it sort of was a game changer for me when I spoke to Trent Dalton, and he just said, you've got to put your heart and soul on the page. If you don't put your heart and the soul on the page, they're just words. And so I honestly think My Extraordinary Mum was signed as quickly as it was because I really had something to say about women and motherhood and feminism. And I wasn't just focused on words and technique. I was really focused on delivering this, message as a mother and a woman and a feminist myself. And so I credited Trent. I said, thank you so much, Trent, for giving me that heart and soul advice, because I really think it was the thing that made the difference.
Well, that was really sage advice for aspiring picture book writers, and some great recommendations too from Dani Vee from Words and Nerds podcast.
I still can't believe she's done 500 episodes in just 5 years. We have a long way to go, don't we?
We do. And she's got a new picture book coming out. It's called My Epic Dad. So, take a breath, Dani.
This is Sundoku, where all readers are welcome.
My name's Monique and I'm 50 years old. It's hard to pinpoint when I fell in love with reading. I've been reading all my life. We always had encyclopedias and there was always this situation where you'd ask your parents for the definition of a word and they would tell us to go and check the dictionary or the encyclopedia. So we were always looking at books as kids. We didn't have a TV in my house until I was about 10, so there was really no option. If you weren't outside playing, you were reading books. Some of the favourite books from my childhood are European folk tales that my mum had. I now have them and I've read them to my children, and they're just compilations of folk tales and fables and old wives' tales. Really interesting, and they always sort of captured my imagination and took me to a different world. The novels that I come back to is The God of Smaller Things. It opened up a different culture for me. That one has stuck with me ever since I brought it. Anything by Haruki Murakami, basically. Absolutely amazing novelist. I think I have every single Haruki Murakami book. A lot of his stories are based in the Japanese culture, either in folklore or in modern contemporary stories, which, unless you travel a lot, you don't get to experience the aspects of the culture that his stories bring to life. Jeffrey Eugenides' Middlesex. It's probably one of the first novels I read that really touched on the plight of the LGBTQI community and the issues that people who don't fit into the norm of being a male or a female, someone coming in from an asexual perspective, that gave me a really good understanding of the challenges faced by someone in that situation and the way other people look at it, the way other people judge, how it's not someone's choice to be asexual or any of the other non-binary genders, it's just the way it is. So that was a real eye-opener for me, and yeah, I'd definitely recommend it to anyone.
That's nearly it for today's episode. Now, we all know the healing power of a good read, but I caught up with an academic who's researching the healing power of being read to when you're undergoing chemotherapy. It's really interesting.
Well, I'll definitely tune in for that one.
You have no choice. You're going to have to.
But for now, unfortunately, our time's up. So that's it for this episode of Sundoku. Nice to have you with us. It's Sarah Martin.
And I'm Michaela Andreev. Catch you next time.
This podcast is produced by 4 book addicts refusing treatment.
Kath Keneally,
Michaela Andreev,
Annie Hastwell,
and me, Sarah Martin. Our thanks to composer Quincy Grant for the music. If you want to know more about the books and authors featured in this episode, check out the show notes. And you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at SundokuCast. TSUNDOKU cast.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free. And you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.